Folks, welcome to another podcast. I know that it's been a very long time since you've heard from me. What can I say? We have a war to fight, and I've been deployed here for a fourth time, fighting in Gaza, trying to do our part to get back the hostages from Gaza. And thankfully, during our operations, we were able to retrieve the remains of the hostages, of the few that we were able to retrieve, and at least give some closure to the families during those missions. And so now I'm back, traveling, speaking, and also trying to get the podcast up and running again and get you some interesting people to listen to. As you can see today, this is a very unusual session. Normally, I'm one-on-one with another individual. Today, we got three incredible people with an incredible story, each and every one of them. One of them is combating anti-Semitism, uh, uh, trauma care, and everything to do with the effects of war. One is a neo-Nazi, and one is a former Muslim extremist. So
Former neo-Nazi.
former, yes, all former, okay, or current. A
Important part
case.
there.
I'm the only
Thank you.
current one. I'm the current fighter of anti-Semitism. Everyone else are formers.
Yeah,
Well, I'm the current skinhead, so
exactly. See, I wanted people to try to guess who's the skinhead here, but any case, you all ruined it for me.
Sorry about
So, so basically, the most unlikely batch of people to come together and to discuss some very interesting issues here. And yeah, I mean, this is like you guys were saying, the beginning of a joke or whatever. Three different, very different people walk into a bar and whatnot. Guys, go ahead, take it off from here. Explain to the people that are listening now, how on God's green earth would this batch of people be working together to combat, from my understanding, a lot of the uh, different groups, if it's Islamic extremists, if it's white extremism, different backgrounds of extremism that we're seeing today. And there's a huge rise in that in the world today, as we're seeing. What do you guys have to say about that?
I can start out. The way we all got together is we all work for a brilliant organization called Parents for Peace. People can find Parents for Peace at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. At Parents for Peace, we counsel families who have a loved one who's been radicalized into any form of violent extremism regarding ways to lead that loved one to a healthier path. We also work directly with the radicalized individuals, as well as training frontline personnel like law enforcement, social workers, teachers, mental health professionals. And we're also developing a curriculum for prevention of violent extremism. And as Mubin and I have worked in this space for decades. Miri is a doctor and a very well-respected mental health professional who's been working in the trauma space for decades. And as anyone who's involved in violent extremism prevention nowadays knows, anti-Semitism is the common thread. It's actually the connective tissue between all forms of violent extremism that threaten us in North America and Europe. So we feel at Parents for Peace, if we're going to counter violent extremism in a holistic way, we need to direct a lot of attention to the foundation of violent extremism, which we believe is anti-Semitism.
Well, I've noticed that there is an alarming increase in anti-Semitic attacks, if they're physical or verbal or written online, social media, all the different forms of the spreading of hate, the enacting that hate, and it's alarming. I mean, it's over 600% an increase in Canada, I understand, and then in the States, you have, I think it's like over 200% from the previous year, and so on and so forth. So, like 4 years ago, you had, for example, about 2,000 something anti-Semitic attacks in the United States, in North America, right? This year and the year before, post October 7th, that's triple, close to 4 times the amount of anti-Semitic attacks in the past 2 years, since nearly 2 years now, since October 7th. Why are we seeing that?
Arno was saying it's about normalizing hate, right? Anti-Semitism is a non-Jewish problem that is affecting Jewish people and also affecting everybody else because it's the gateway to radicalization. So while in the past you were thinking it's just coming from the far right, we're seeing it now coming also from the far left and somewhat in the middle as well. So when you think about social justice group, they have been taking the narrative and I'm going to link it to extremism. One of the big thing with the people that are more vulnerable to extremism usually have unresolved grievances. They have some victimhood in them. And when you have someone coming and saying, I'm going to give you a cause to fight for, and also all of your grievances is not about you, it's about the Jews. Now you have something to do, you have a cause to fight. And it's kind of cool right now in the US to be anti Semitic, unfortunately. So you feel like you're part of a larger group. And in fact, if you're not part of that group, they're going to push you out. In order to be part of a lot of spaces today in the academia, in colleges, even in some social justice places, you have to say that you are against Israel and that you hate Zionists and you're against some of the Jews. So people put it under free speech, but free speech has limitation. And like Arno mentioned, my field is trauma and trauma informed care and trauma informed organization. Being safe and feeling safe is a requirement for everybody to be able to thrive. If I go to a place and I don't feel safe as a Jewish person, as a Zionist person, then I'm not going to be able to function the same way that my colleague might be functioning. If I'm a student and I'm constantly hyper vigilant, if someone's going to bully me because I'm Jewish, my prefrontal cortex, to get nerdy for a second, it's going to shut down. And that's the part of the brain that is about executive functioning and problem solving. So what you're seeing right now has been in the making for years and years. I'm an October 8th Jew, so I didn't know. For me, it was more a wake up call October 8th. But the data shows, and the FBI actually shows that this has been going on for years. The brainwashing starts in education in K to 12, actually. And Arno has been very vocal about what's happening in Massachusetts, for example, at the Massachusetts Teacher Association. It's part of the education system. So what we're seeing on college campuses right now did not start on college campuses. What you're seeing from both sides did not start on October 7th. It's been there for years, only now they're loud about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say one of the contributors to how to say basically giving a platform for that hatred that has been there for years. I mean, Arno, in your background with, I guess you guys call it being a skinhead or neo-Nazi or whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, essentially, a lot of that movement or that group that you're a part of, a lot of the, I guess, the hate and what you're kind of brainwashed to, who's the bad guy, who are we targeting? It's the Jewish people, it's blacks, it's Hispanics. I understand I mean, it's basically all kinds of races except for the supreme white race or whatever, right? And it gives you that feeling of superiority or whatever. But ironically today, I mean, because that used to be shunned for many years, but ironically today, now it's like cool to be all that in Europe and America. And it's like people are coming out of the woodwork. But like you were saying, Miri, this is something that's been for years. So Arno, in your past, it's not like something that was like current. I mean, we're talking about for many, many years. It's the foundation of that movement. Am I right?
Absolutely. So, to give you a time frame, I was a neo-Nazi skinhead from 1987 to 1994. And on October 8th, I was stunned to see, often word for word, the exact same anti Semitic rhetoric that I used as a white nationalist neo Nazi skinhead in the late 80s and early 90s. Only it's not coming from white nationalist skinheads. It's coming from professors. It's coming from politicians. It's coming from celebrities. When I was a neo Nazi, we called the United States government the Zionist occupational government. We said that Zionists controlled the media. Anything we didn't like in the media, we said it was Zionist propaganda. We said that Jews were committing genocide. We said that Jews were occupiers and Jews were colonizers. All of the exact same language that we used as neo Nazis in the late 80s and early 90s is now coming from Hollywood movie stars and professors in Ivy League schools. And it's trickled down into the student bodies, not only of Ivy League colleges, but of colleges across North America and Europe, not to mention K-12 schools. As Miri mentioned, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the teachers union for the state of Massachusetts, was handing out to their teachers what they called a resource to discuss Palestine. And in these resources, there were literally photos of a Magen David made of folded up dollar bills. There was a photo of a snake with a fist grabbing the snake's tongue and cutting the tongue off, saying F Zionism. This is not coming from neo-Nazi skinheads. It's coming from the Teachers Union of Massachusetts. And the National Education Association, the nationwide teachers union in the United States, was all for this. And they supported the MTA in their efforts to maintain the anti-Semitic material that they were handing out to our kids. As we all know, not too long ago, just a month ago or so, the NEA voted to ban the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith from working with their teachers because they were Zionists. And that vote passed in the NEA. Fortunately, because of the very righteous backlash that happened, some cooler heads prevailed at the top of the NEA and backed down from banning the ADL. But I don't think that solves the problem. The problem is there's a deep embedded anti-Semitic rhetoric and ideology within all aspects of our civilization right now, and we all need to do the best we can to combat it, because as Miri said, anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish problem, it's a problem for anti-Semites. I know from experience, when I was an anti-Semite, it literally put my life into the toilet, and I tried to kill myself twice during that span. At Parents for Peace, with the cases that we work, where we're counseling families with a radicalized kid, in well over 3/4 of our cases, anti-Semitism is a component in the ideology that is destroying these families. And when I say destroying, I mean children going to jail for decades because they were involved in ISIS plots that were anti-Semitic. Children going to jail, being kicked out of school for talking about mass casualty violence from an anti-Semitic frame. So anti-Semitism, while it harms Jews first and foremost, and that's the first reason why we all need to be concerned about it, but what a lot of people miss is that anti-Semitism harms the anti-Semite. It's toxic, it's seductive, it's addictive. It's every bit as toxic and addictive as crack cocaine or heroin, only we don't have the teachers union handing out crack cocaine to middle schoolers, but they're happy to hand out this anti-Semitic material. That's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, what you pointed out there, because, we do have a drug problem globally, right? But you don't have the educational system or law enforcement or government handing you the drugs, right, for your addiction, right? I mean, most countries, law-abiding countries, they combat that. What I find is troubling, like what you're saying, is that you have the educational system, people within the educational system that are actually empowering people to become hateful, to become anti-Semites, and really, I mean, at a young age like that, you're ruining this child's childhood. You're taking their childhood from him, or from her, right? Because instead of them enjoying their childhood and their innocence, and this is the same thing that I've seen. What I think a lot of people don't understand, they look at a person like me, and I'm the bad guy. I'm the Nazi today, by the way, right? The IDF soldier that's
Oh,
fighting
welcome to the
these
club.
ideologies.
You're
We're
the
both
baby
Nazis,
killer.
apparently.
Yeah,
All of us. We're all
yeah.
Nazis now.
We're all Nazis. Although
Yeah.
in every other home you'll find, in Arabic, Mein Kampf, or similar literature that idealizes the Nazis and how they were so amazing, in Arabic, in their language, right? That's what they're being taught in schools and so on and so forth. So, Mobin, can you please also kind of give us the angle from the radical Islamists in how is it that it's like they find each other, so to speak, when it comes to extremists, right? There, and some are calling it the green red alliance, or the radical Islamists with the radical Marxists and communists, and it's like they're kind of helping each other. But the irony is, they have nothing in common, right? You take the Jew out of the equation of who we're all fighting and having as the target, literally they will slaughter each other. I mean, so can you explain a little bit how that kind of works from the radical Islamist background that you came out of?
Yeah. There's this cartoon that I saw, which I think illustrates this perfectly. It's a caricature of a, I guess it says radical Islam across his sash, and he says, "Our fight against the Jews is a holy one." And next to him is a caricature of a KKK guy in a white hood saying, "You tell him, brother." Right? Um, and that, I think, yeah, that just that tells you that ultimately it comes down to the enemy of my enemy, right? Um, and so that's the mentality. But let's take a kind of a step back a little bit and look at the timeline of things. You can go back to ancient Israelite history if you want, and you can see that the Jewish people have been persecuted repeatedly. I mean, there are some big incidents that have happened. Specifically, I'm thinking about the two temple periods. When the first temple was built and then the Babylonians came, destroyed it, took the Jews into captivity. Cyrus frees them, rebuilds the temple continues. Then the Romans come and destroy it, and the Jews are sent into exile and so on. So there is that ancient history where there seems to be this repetitive nature of persecution of Jews. Then when you look in the modern time, and my whole thing is I can understand from the Jewish perspective why they would want their own country. It's they had the land for a long time, and because of all these displacements, they were removed from the land, but it was always with an eye on that land, right? So the idea of 1947, 48, for Israel to be created as a regular country, came at a time when other countries were also being formed at the same time. So when people kind of pick on Israel as this unique special case, I keep saying, I'm like, they're not a unique case. It's not a special case in that sense, because even from a terrorism scholarship perspective, when you look at, for example, there was a framework to look at the different kinds of extremism over the decades, the centuries. You had the four wave theory, right, by David C. Rappaport, rest in peace, where it was anarchist terrorism. So think Tsar Alexander II, who was killed by an IED, right, in his carriage, or President McKinley, who was killed by an anarchist. People forget that. You have anarchism. You have um, post-colonial terrorism, quote unquote. So this is around the time when groups that are fighting for the independence of their countries or creation of their countries, you get a lot of this conflict and violence, and from that countries are born, right? Israel fits into that. Pakistan fits into that. I mean, pick another country. Right after World War II, we saw this huge proliferation in countries basically gaining independence. Then you have the third wave, which is called New Left, right, which is Marxist based terrorism. And then you get the fourth wave, religious based. So let's look at that Marxist based and religious based, because especially in the Israel context, this is where things kind of really emerge. Post World War II, you had, of course, the influence of the so-called Mufti of Jerusalem, trying to make buddy buddies with Hitler, hoping that Hitler would win and then he would become the de facto ruler of Jerusalem, or at least have some kind of authority in that area, and used his connections with the Germans, with the German military at that time, to promote by radio primarily, but also through print media, very anti-Jewish tracts. So this incestuous relationship between post World War II dynamics and the religious groups were really starting to form at this time. Then, if you look at when Israel was formed, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, there were no religious organizations really. It was overwhelmingly Marxist groups. The PLO started as a Marxist group. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was run by a Palestinian Christian, wasn't even a Muslim guy, right? George Habash, right? This is also when you start to see the airplane hijackings, right? When you start to see a lot of these kidnappings, the Olympics in Munich massacre. So the vast majority of a lot of these attacks that were happening at that time were coming from Marxist groups. It was only until really, I think, 79, 80 when things really took on this very religious cover, right? A so-called Islamic Revolution in Iran, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and then 1980 Israel-Lebanon war, Iran-Iraq war, Hezbollah attack 1981, right? Lebanon barracks. And so now you start to see this proliferation of Islamist groups trying to basically take on and carry on, take the baton from the Marxists from before. So fast forward, here we are, 2025, and you have in the streets of Western countries queers for Palestine on one side, and Hamas and Hezbollah, long live them forever, on the other side. And this really, it tells you that, the reason why, and there are many reasons, obviously you cannot give single, reasons for why people are getting involved in this stuff, but you can see from the Marxist side they have been using the grievances against capitalism, against Western authority. This has been embedded for decades, especially in schools and higher education. This guilt that the people have of who they are and the history of their countries, right? They have to feel guilty, they have to feel bad about what they've done, the societies that they've created, the countries, the nations that they've created, that everyone benefits from. Like, it's just the irony that I see, that these people they're like spoiled brats, right? They live in this very, very free society, and because they're not subject to the pressures and the tests that other people in other countries are subject to, they have the luxury to go out and protest against this, and effectively protest against the very same country in which they live, which affords them the freedoms to do that protesting, completely oblivious to the fact that if you were in some other country or some other system, this Marxist system that you claim, this communist system that you claim, you would never be doing any of this stuff there. Like the queers in Palestine, your heads would be off in Gaza and in those areas. Like, so that complete disconnect. There's this cognitive dissonance, right? They feel they need to do this protesting. They feel they feel the need to do it to be a part of this larger group, like Miri was saying, because everybody's waving that flag and nobody else is, supporting them, and nobody else is standing with them. So let us join this group, which is allowing just anybody and everybody to come in, because the goal that they all share is bleeding Israel.
So how does one get into that kind of movement? How, like, what's the draw? What's the appeal, right? Because I, like, for me, like, you're making an interesting point, right? That it's in a way, it's these privileged brats that have the ability to go and do that instead of go and work, right? I mean, that's something I pointed out to people. They were like, oh, these grassroots protests here in Israel. I'm like, really? I'm like, I got a job. I'm here doing my job as a security expert, trying to get my client from A to B for his business meetings in the middle of the day. And there's thousands of people on the streets in the middle of the week having the privilege to do that. I'm like, I'm sorry, but like, real people have jobs, real people have a life, real people who might want to oppose that, they don't have the luxury to go and say, well, we oppose that protest because we think you guys' thing is all about, crap. You know what I mean? And I find that to be quite ironic and interesting, because that's exactly the same here in Israel. Because we are privileged in the Middle East, and the people have the ability to do that. That's what's the draw? Like, what's the deal?
Well, I think it depends on your history, right? Like, I think just like with trauma is universal, but also very personal for each person. I think, and if you talk with Mubin and Arno, you'll hear very different stories of what draw them to the hate cycle. So I think what's different right now is the collective. So when you're seeing it happening again and again, and especially with social media, it's becoming an echo chamber. So whatever the algorithm is feeding you, you're thinking that, oh, everybody's with me, I'm in the right. And I think that's another push of going to those protests. I also think that, thinking of the left and the liberals, for example, the protest is a way to confirm their own bias. To Mubin's point about cognitive dissonance, if I was throughout my life a DI champion, and let's say I believe that Israel is the monster and they're all bad, and Zionists are the monster and they're all bad. How in the world can I say that what October 7th, like in my mind, I can't justify October 7th, right? Like if I look at the evidence and the atrocities, there must be a different story there, because that means that I was wrong my whole life. So I think that's why you see the posters being ripped down, because the left cannot see the actual faces of the babies and the kids and the civilians that were butchered or they were kidnapped. They can't see it. They need to justify and they need to dehumanize the people in order to justify to themselves that cognitive dissonance of, no, 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 I was right. They're all awful. And the more the dissonance is intense, the more you're going to see them protesting and being more in your face and more violent. And I think the other thing is people don't want to listen anymore. They want to answer. So when I have conversation with people or trying to, I'm all about uncomfortable conversations. I love uncomfortable conversation. I feel like that's the only way to move forward and to grow and to change, right? People don't want to listen. They're there to respond back. And I've been doing this work for in that specific field of anti-Semitism and radicalization for almost 2 years now. Not in any other field have I've noticed the same reaction. I've been an advocate my whole life and medical stuff and mental health. There's something about Jews, there's something about this trauma that people cannot hold that pain, that they're just invalidating again and again. And they make it a hierarchy of empathy. And when you do that, when you start seeing people as problems and not as people, we all lose our humanity. If we can't hold each other's pain, then we can't have a conversation. And I think that's what you're seeing on the street out there. You're seeing people that just want to yell and want to shout, and they don't want to actually solve anything.
I'd add to this, to Miri's excellent points there. Looking at this through an addiction lens, which is one of the many things that sets Parents for Peace above and beyond our other orgs in this space that do similar but not the same work. At Parents for Peace, we believe that hate is the drug of choice for the radicalized individuals. They're using hate as a substance the same way I, as an alcoholic who drank profusely for 30 years, used alcohol as a substance to numb my trauma, to distract myself from the issues that I need to look in the mirror and think about honestly. And it's a rush. It's a party. And right now, it's like there's this raging keg party on every college campus where all the cool kids are there and they look like they're having so much fun. Oh, and they're doing something important too. They're speaking out against injustice. I want to be a part of that. So that's an attraction for kids at the get-go. And like I quit drinking 21 years ago, haven't had a drop of alcohol since, don't miss it one bit. But I can speak with authority about alcoholism because I'm an alcoholic. And I see all these parallels between conventional substance abuse and addiction to hate addiction. And the same way when I started drinking, and pretty much almost every alcoholic has the same story. It's a party. Everybody's having so much fun. There's a big group of people and we're all drinking and whooping it up. Woo, this is so much fun. And then the next thing you know, you're sitting at home drinking by yourself. And the fun's not there anymore, but you still need the alcohol because you're addicted to it. And now you realize it's destroying your life. Now you realize it's destroying your family. It's destroying your ability to be a good father or mother. But you're still addicted to that substance. You're habituated and in many cases physically addicted to the experience of taking that substance in. It's already been well established that people can be addicted to gambling. You get an endorphin rush when you're gambling. People are addicted to pornography. You get the same type of physical response when you view pornography as other people may get from heroin or crack cocaine. Hate has the exact same effect on the human body. And that's why people get addicted to it. So you have people who jump into these encampments and protests because it looks cool and everybody's doing it. It looks like they're having so much fun, just like a keg party. They do it again. They do it again. They're doing it every weekend. Now they do it every other day. Now it's every day. Because when they're not at the protests, they're on their screens doom scrolling about the evil Zionists. So they're taking in their hate through their phones. They don't have to be at the encampment now. They have access to it through a screen. That's another really important thing to understand about hate addiction. When I was an alcoholic, I still am an alcoholic. I'll always be an alcoholic. But when I drank, I had to physically go get my beer and liquor from the liquor store. And where I live, they stop selling it at 9 p.m. So if it's after 9 p.m., I'm out of luck. I can't get my substance. When you're addicted to hate, all you need is a screen, data connection, and you have 24/7 access to a mainline connection of the substance you're addicted to at all times. And not only is they're not when you're a neo-Nazi, you kind of got to go to the backwaters of the internet to get to your people, like 4chan, 8chan, all the like literal backwaters of the internet. You're not going to find it necessarily on big media platforms. Well, if you're addicted to anti-Zionism as your form of hate, which is plainly anti-Semitism, because it's just strange that it's the one Jewish country on earth that you have a problem with. You don't have a problem with all these other theocracy, ethno nations on earth, of which there are a ton. You can get that same sort of hate addiction substance from NPR, from CNN, from the New York Times, from huge media platforms that have millions and millions of followers. Again, irresponsibly disseminating an incredibly toxic and addictive and seductive substance in the form of hate towards Jews.
Yeah, I think you made some very interesting points there. I think one of the most important things that people are unaware of is how social media is the vehicle in which you are actually clumped into your camp. And like you were saying, Miri, it's like the algorithm feeds into your worldview. If it's a negative one, then unfortunately, it's only going to feed that hatred and that negativity that unfortunately also leads to actual physical harm, either physical attacks or murder, like we
Mhm.
saw in Washington, as we saw in Washington with the two workers that worked for the Israeli government, the two diplomats, and so on. I mean, the list goes on with what we've been seeing around the world. Um, what I think is interesting is you're saying that hatred is like, and this is something I've never heard before, that hatred is like pornography addiction or drug addiction. I've never heard that because I know, like, for me, I grew up in a world of pain, hurt, conflict with a particular enemy, and always fighting not to hate any individual I see on the streets here of Israel who are Muslim and go, your people are doing this and this to me all the time, right? It's like I'm actually doing the opposite in when I'm examining it myself and my children, the way I raise them. I have to explain to them, this person you see on the street, this Muslim, that's not an October 7th terrorist, or the one who's lobbing rockets, or the one that's kidnapping, or the. It's like you have to kind of like play this weird game of like, no, I can't hate these people, right? Because it's psychologically, it's very difficult to kind of do, I guess, on the one hand. But I've never caught myself, I guess, in a way to where giving into the hate. In fact, quite the opposite. I was doing everything I could to fight it, and I'm actively still
You're naming
keeping
it.
from that. Well,
You're naming
yeah,
it. But
yeah.
here's the
So
thing. Here's
I don't understand that. You know what I mean? I don't understand just having this drive to hate others because I just think it's so wrong.
So what you're describing is that you're asserting a choice and you're taking control. When you think of, I'm going to bring it back to the trauma world and then we'll go to the addiction world. Trauma is a loss of top-down control, literally from the brain, right? It's a loss of the prefrontal cortex stop working all the way down to the body to the fight, flight, freeze response. What we can do is in that moment, if you can reassert control, and it can be something small, like literally naming what's happening, all the way to taking action, then you're telling your brain, I'm in control, I have a choice. Dr. Edith Eger, who's a Holocaust survivor, an amazing writer, wrote a book, The Choice. And she talks about how even though everything she's been through in the camps, she had a choice and she chose whether to hate or not hate someone. But it's work, it's a work in progress, right? Hate takes a lot of energy, but also raising compassion takes a lot of energy. For me, after October 7th, I worked on raising compassion because Hamas stole this compassion from me. And I would, in my mind, similar to what you're saying, I would not let him win because part of my values as a human being is compassion. But it took a lot of work to do that. Now, when you have someone who has victimhood, unresolved grievances, any type of mental health condition that makes them more vulnerable, and then you give them a different opportunity, a different choice, not a great choice, ineffective choice, maybe an easier one because it gives them a sense of belonging, then you go into the hate cycle as well. And similar to what Arno was saying about hate as an addiction, my role before this is what I was like before I became Parents for Peace person. My role was trauma and self-harm and suicidality. I was a director of intensive outpatient program. That was my expertise. Self-harm is addicting. It works on the same brain parts that addiction works on, and we don't need to get nerdy and get into all the different parts, but it's exactly the same mechanism. Hate to me is like self-harm in a way because you are hurting yourself. So it makes total sense that from a scientific perspective it's going to work on the same mechanism. If you're strong enough and you have a good sense of values, and we all bring what we bring to the table, your upbringing, what you're doing as a parent and teaching your kids those values, you teaching them that they have choice and they have control, and now you're shifting it. It's almost like you have two choices in life. When trauma happens, you can go this route and you can actually grow from trauma. You can forget trauma, you learn to live with the trauma, or you go to this route and now you're going down the hate cycle. If you don't assign the hate to the perpetrator, then you constantly just carrying it with you, and then that takes energy.
Mobin, could you explain to me what I mean? There's billions of Muslims around the world, right? And thank God they're not all blowing themselves up either on planes or on buses or carrying out stab attacks, etc. Right? Because then the world would be really, really, really dark place if that were the case. If everybody was a jihadist, what what leads people from the Islamic community to become an extremist? What's the pull? What's the draw?
Yeah, I mean, easy question. There's always a multiplicity of factors that are involved. There are some common themes that show up. You can look at, for example, the interplay between ideology and grievances. So there's a great quote by my friend Peter Neumann, where ideology without grievances doesn't resonate, doesn't make sense, doesn't appeal to the mind. Ideology without grievances doesn't resonate. And grievances without ideology are not acted upon. Grievances without ideology are not acted upon, because ideology here are action enabling ideas. So, for example, when people say, well, the Middle East is radicalized, obviously, because the military interventions by the US. Okay, so then it would follow that if America left tomorrow, suddenly the extremists would lay down their weapons and start playing nice with everyone, right?
Right.
Wrong, right? So
Like in Syria, right? I mean, right? As
there are
of
limits. There are limits to each of those things. So that's why we say there is an interplay between them. Another way to look at it is this is one of my quotes that sometimes or at times ideology, whether you religious, political, or whatever, I'm just keeping it neutral here. At times, ideology is a driver of violent extremism, but at other times, just a passenger with other psychosocial factors at the wheel. Okay. So this leaves open the possibility that, for example, like you can get somebody who takes on the costume of ideology, right? I like to use the term terrorism in Islamic costume because they wear a costume, they literally put on a costume and then they behave like this. And then sometimes you might find, and we've found in some of the cases that we've dealt with, where it's actually has nothing to do with that ideology. There's something else going on in this person's life. Could be a family issue, could be a mental health issue, could be like a pathological issue that they might have. We've been, for example, recently seeing an uptick in It's still a small sample group, but young people with autism spectrum disorder, who are getting sucked into this. So there are a number of reasons why somebody might get involved in that. This is a very general thing. Now, coming specifically to the Muslim community, I mean, I was thinking about this and I thought, some of this has to do with, I think, historical relations between Jews and Muslims. But that, I mean, that's been going for centuries, right? I mean, there's been some good times, there's been some not so good times, right? I mean, the Jewish golden age, took place during the years of Muslim Spain, right? And then those reconquistador Christians, or well, not the conquistadors, but I mean re Christianization of the Iberian Peninsula. Those Christians came after both the Jews and the Muslims, right? And they started calling us crypto Jews and crypto Muslims. So there's been good and there's been bad. What you get is people who focus on the bad, right? They say that, look, this is, you know what I mean? It's been bad and that's all it is and that's it. And taking that, and the next part of that is when we say jihadist, we're talking about those people who take the verses of fighting and make it the primary prism through which they look at the world. Now, I did a little experiment on Chat GPT, and I was asking, like, of all the verses, you know what I mean, how many verses relate to fighting? It's a fraction of a percentage of the Quran. There are far more verses that talk about being good, behaving properly, good conduct, righteousness, charity, helping the poor, praying, right? Giving sadaqah, right? And yet, why don't they focus on those things? Why do they focus on these little things, on that little portion, and they make it their thing? So what you're finding today, I think, especially in the Muslim world, is there's a lot of denial when it comes to this stuff. They just don't want to look at their own problems. So, for example, looking at the situation in the Middle East in general, where you have these authoritarian countries, you cannot protest against those countries, but you want to come out and you want to protest against Israel, have at it, right? It allows them to use Israel as their sounding board, right? The people are frustrated. Let them yell at somebody. They better not be yelling at us. Find somebody that they can yell at that's not us, quote unquote. That's the Jews, right? And again, looking back to that religious history, that religious mentality of looking at other religions, looking down on other religions, not just Jews, but Christians, right? These are some of the factors that contribute to what you're seeing, like Islamist anti-Semitism, if you want to call it that. And I wanted to make the last point. Sorry, I always use this example, because I laugh when I do it, because it's like I'm trapping this young radicalized individual, and I give them this scenario. I said, look, there's this Muslim general, okay, and he has as his confidant this Jewish guy. Okay, not just any Jew, he's a rabbi. What do you think of this Muslim general? 100% of the time, he kafir. The one who sits with the disbeliever is a disbeliever. I was like, well, that's interesting, because I'm talking about Salahuddin and the rabbi is Maimonides, right? I mean, and so you cannot read, the Jewish Bible without seeing a reference to Maimonides at the bottom. And Salahuddin, you're gonna tell me you got better jihadi credentials than him? I mean, he fought the Crusaders. He beat the Crusaders. So it just shows you that even though it's this like Jekyll and Hyde mentality, I think, because on one hand, we Muslims, we want to brag about how, oh, there were Jews who worked in the palaces of the sultans, and there were, right. But
Hmm.
but you wouldn't want to hire a Jew today, right? You're
Hmm.
against that today, but even back then they did that. They had no issue with that.
Right.
Salahuddin had no issue with that. In fact, Salahuddin chose Rabbi Maimonides over a Muslim physician who was applying for the same position,
Hmm.
right? So did Salahuddin, because choose to be an ally of the Jews over the Muslims, and therefore he's out of Islam?
How
So
much
there
did
is
they
this,
pay him? How
yeah,
much did
right.
they pay him?
Right. There's an interesting. I don't know if the story is true. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's part of mythology or what. But if you look up, there's a story about how Maimonides got to be that chief physician, and it was basically like the Muslim guy was trying to poison the rabbi, and so it kind of reminded me of that scene from Princess Bride, where like they're kind of celebrating the, the drink the poison thing. But I think what it comes down to is, and really, and maybe I can use that as a, and I'll just close with this. It really is very, I think it's disrespectful, I think, to Islam as a religion that these people have turned to this level of hatred, right? Just hating people because whatever. And unequivocally, I mean, they have no sense of anything. People were saying, how dare the Arabs normalize relationships with the relationship with Israel, right? I think especially, I mean, I won't name them, but certain countries purchasing weapons from Israel. How dare they? This is like one of the worst things that they could ever do, until you read Islamic history, I mean, properly, and you discover that even the Prophet, alayhi salam, bought weapons from the Jews, even those days, right? So things really kind of haven't changed in one way. So what I'm trying to show is that there is this reality, and then there is this theory and this idea that people have. And this idea, it's a failed tactic at the end of the day. These so-called pro-Palestinian, movement and this and that, it's totally failed. It's failed from the time it started. In the decades that it went through the Marxist cycle, it failed, right? And then after that, and all of everybody gathered together and he tried to annihilate the Jews. And how'd that work out for you guys? Okay, and they don't want to learn those lessons, right? And so here we are today, and and it's funny because none of this protesting is going to change a thing on the ground. I mean, thank you, I guess, for people who think they're doing the right thing and they're speaking up for justice, but they're really not moving the needle anywhere. And I'll leave it at this: after October 8th, when the October 7th attacks happened, I couldn't believe that what had happened is, and what we call an addiction to hate, whatever, from an Islamic perspective, we see this as intoxication, right? So the Quran talks about those who are intoxicated by lust, intoxicated by worldly, seeking the worldly things. It's an intoxication that people came under. So when you're kidnapping babies and old people, and you think that this is, you call this resistance now. We're using different words. Back to what Miri was saying about, we have to, in order for them to make sense of what they're doing, because it will come back to them and they'll realize, like, and this goes, I'll be straight, this goes for the pro-Israel side too. When you're looking at suffering people on the other side and you're doing the exact same sidestepping mechanisms, you're doing the exact same thing that the other side is doing, right? So I would try to remind them that, and like what you were saying, Doran, about like, you take those steps to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to look at just any random Muslim looking guy and think he's like that. That's because of your personal constitution, your values, which I believe, you've learned from Judaism. I'm very happy to have been around many good Jewish people. I've studied a lot about Jewish values. I mean, especially Kabbalah stuff, Sufi. So we're very close. But this is the same thing. Like, I do that too. I make sure that I'm not, and this is why I do what I do from the Muslim perspective. Believe me, it is not. You gotta be waving this flag, right? That's how everyone sees it. And so after October 8th, when I just said, whoa, 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 folks, like, all you got to do is say, yeah, we're not with Hamas. We disagree with them, whatever wording they wanted to use. We condemn Hamas. We don't believe in kidnapping babies and old people. Okay, but let me tell you how bad Israel is. You could have done that and gotten away with it and it would have been fine. But they couldn't even do that. And I'm reading and I'm like, am I mental? Am I crazy that I feel this reaction that, hey, this is not right what you guys did, right? And then here I'm reading, I have it on my phone, a hadith where the Prophet alayhi salam is telling his companions, hey, when you go out into the battle, don't kill women, don't kill children, don't kill the elderly, don't destroy occupied buildings, don't burn trees. And and I look at what Hamas and company did, and they broke all those rules within the first few hours. So much so that the former dean of Sharia at Gaza Islamic University gave a fatwa against Hamas, saying that they broke all these rules. So this is what I say to those people out there who think they're doing whatever they think they're doing. From the Islamic perspective, I say that if you are going to break the laws of Islam when it comes to war, don't look for victory. That's not what you're going to find. You're only going to invite destruction. And this is unfortunately, the situation that we see now. So
You know, it's interesting what you said there because I don't know enough about Islam personally. I just know of very little, to be honest. More from just my Muslim friends, asking them, questioning, whatever. It's not something I've done a deep dive on per se. Um, and that's a very interesting point about the burning of trees, because that's actually a phenomenon here. And I call it, was it nature terrorism or whatever? Like it's like they're doing it to destroy the Zionist state, to show their resistance, but you're burning down trees, forests, you know, in the country that you're claiming that Allah is going to give you and dispossess the Jew with. And I'm like, but what are you going to be left with if you love the land like the Jewish people love the land? I mean, when we talk about Zionists, right? Az Haaretz. It's all about, exactly. It's about Haaretz, right? The love for the land is one of the like pillars of Zionism. It's that we're seeing ourselves as coming back to the land that God promised, and we're going to put our hands to the land and bear the fruit. That the fruit's going to come back. And we saw that after 1948, that the land that was barren came back to life. So a lot of the beauty of the land, ironically, wasn't during the Islamic period with the Turkish empire that ruled with the Ottomans, right? That wasn't the time where this land came to life. It was after the Jews. So they had over 400 years to make something of this place, right? Nothing. Jews came back with an actual real passion and a real love for the land. And the reason why I say real, because that's the contrast that I saw. If you really love this land, like the Jewish people do, you see there's a real connect, and that there's a real, how to say, the land itself reacts to it, right? Nature does. But what's crazy is that there are Muslims who think they're doing the will of Allah by burning down trees when you're telling me this is against the Quran. I mean, I've never heard that, and I just find it so ironic. And by the way, they did that the last forest fire, and that's just right here where I live. They were doing with the balloons from Gaza. Yeah, this was years ago, but the most recent was this last year, Independence Day. It was actually, we have Memorial Day where we remember the fallen who fought for the land, and then at nightfall it's like a crazy kind of, talk about psychology, this crazy kind of thing where we mourn and then we rejoice, literally. Yeah, party literally the night of a whole day of more of memorializing the fallen soldiers. So I was here at our memorial site with my children, and in the backdrop, the forest is on fire, and we're getting choked out in, because it's an open air memorial site that we were at, and it was just such a bizarre kind of picture. I'm like, these people are crazy. They won't even let us mourn for the fallen, which this year, of course, was more commemorative, if you can say, because we were also memorializing the soldiers that died on October 7th.
They will
Yeah.
fail, as you've been seeing them fail. They thought this was this great victory that they achieved on October 7, and they have this ability, this tendency to mythologize even their defeats as victories.
Hmm.
And then surprise a group that used suicide bombings throughout the Intifada, second Intifada in particular. Surprise, surprise, they're willing to burn their own land down as long as Israel bleeds from it,
Hmm.
right? Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, they're willing to kill the women, the children, everybody. They will put everybody in front to die for their cause so that they can then lionize themselves later on. So
Hmm.
it's unfortunate. Like, obviously, it's a terrible situation, what's happening at every level, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
seeing internal, criticisms in Israeli society, because that's Israel, right? You see people, at least they can hold that empathy and sympathy for the so-called other, but
Hmm.
you just don't see this on the other side. There's just it's an either or. and
Hmm.
and I'll leave it at, and I'll just move away from this, but this is
Hmm.
what I think we should really watch for ourselves: how people are being pushed to these very extreme positions, that the sensible middle is like a no-go zone, right? People don't
Hmm.
want to go there. Like Miri was saying, is that people don't even want to have a conversation. They don't even want to hear about, what's been happening, what the Hamas has been doing. what, 2005, 2006, when they came to power. It's 2025 now. Like what if I showed you even the text message I had with one of my cases from yesterday?
Mm.
I said to him basically, like, yeah, I'm like, they wasted their money on tunnels, and then the guy writes back to me, he goes, munafik talk, like this is what a hypocrite would say, right?
Ah,
And I'm like,
wow.
no, buddy. I'm like, this is real talk. Like this is what they did.
Yeah.
They could have built all sorts of things, but they didn't, right? And so you can see this is in the end, what is the end result? You
Mm.
can you can scream and bray like all day long, saying globalize the intifada. People are like just so dumb that they don't understand. They think, it's one of those things that people say,
Yeah.
and this is how things become normalized. And unfortunately, we've seen a major shift. I mean,
Mm.
you're seeing it now. Even me, I see in my YouTube shorts, like, you get some of these platforms that come on, and it's very much in the mainstream now, and that's what's going to make it a lot more difficult. And what I worry about is, especially as things escalate, and nowadays, again, with social media, with all this stuff available for everyone, you cannot counter narrative the videos that people are putting out, the real videos and the faked videos, right? Because I've been seeing some of those too,
Mm.
right? What they call Pallywood, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I seen a really cool one where the guy should have been the Palestinian James Bourne, where he was like backflipping around bullets and this, that, and the other, and it was
Uh,
amazing. But unfortunately, right? I mean, at the end of the day, how can you make sense of, or try to be sympathetic, or try to have this understanding of the other, when the other is just hell-bent on annihilating your people from your land?
But
mm.
can I bring it for a second here? Because there's one thing when it's happening in the Middle East. I think back to the point about anti-Semitism, because you mentioned before, Mubin, like all those protests are not going to change anything. They're not going to change anything for the Middle East. But what we're seeing here is absolutely awful, and those protests leading to increase of anti-Semitism and extremism in general. And I think what's happening is that it's not just that, the us versus them narrative has been embedded. Now the whole world became us versus them. And when you do that, when you dehumanize people to those very oppressor kind of place, us versus them, it's almost like saying being Jewish is the opposite of being Muslim. When I do training about anti Semitism, automatically people will ask me, well, what about training about Islamophobia?
Mm.
It's not just out of the same coin. This is what aboutism. It's not going to work all the time, but that's what people are using right now. So all those protests that we're seeing are adding to that fire. So while maybe in Israel they're not, and my research is about traumatic invalidation, and I hear a lot from Israelis, this is a different type of trauma, and I agree, this is a social trauma. It's not about comparison to the capital T trauma the Israelis are going through, but what's happening to Jews in the United States is traumatizing in a different way, where our pain is not being held, like Mubin was saying. Like the fact that people cannot hold pain, grief, or even just acknowledging that what's happening is awful, that's when you start having a problem. That's when we're losing who we are as society. It's a social trauma. And that's a problem not just for Jews, that's a problem for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe we just can't get people to say kidnapping babies and old people is wrong.
Yeah.
No, they can't
Like,
even
I'm not trying to be like, this is, and even with the Islamophobia, it's like, guys, like, it's Islamophobia is nothing, like, it's not happening to Muslims the way what's happening to Jewish people. So one of the reasons why, like, I do what I do, even to the chagrin of a lot of Muslims, is that, I mean, you would want people on your side if this was happening to you guys.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the fact that we can't even come to a basic thing like that to say that, hey, that's not right.
That's all. I was
Even
asked to do an event with a Palestinian poet, and my instinct was like, yeah, of course, like let's do it. I write poems. It sounds amazing, and I only asked. We need to have a level of understanding. Can that person say that what happened on October 7th was unacceptable? That the atrocity of Hamas, or just we need to condemn that. They said no. I said, well, we
Mm.
can't even have that, and I can't have an event with you. If you can't see my pain and my humanity, then we have no way forward here.
Arno, I got a question for you, buddy. You know, I'm seeing from what I would say the far right and also Christians, an increase in the Christian world, because that's where a lot of my work has been throughout the years. I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements, specifically warning Christians of what's happening with radical Islam, but also with radical socialism and Marxism, all these isms that are brainwashing your children and universities and whatever. And I've been doing this for many years, right? And just seeing the writing on the wall, because people are like they're so naive. I think, especially the Christian world, is so naive. They're like, no, 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 not in America. America's it's a Christian nation, and that's not going to happen. But then you have people like Tucker Carlson, you have people like Candace Owens. They're so-called the moral compass of American society, right? Fighting against racism, fighting, but also, what I respected with Candace is she was like, I'm not going to be a victim of that racism and like white guilt, all, white people in America and all that. And I'm like, awesome, like great. I'm with you on that. But then October 7th happens, and the people you thought had a moral common sense are just, what would a skinhead think about what they're saying? You know what I mean? I'm just thinking, like, are they like laughing? Are these people stupid? Are they like, this is great for us? I'm just curious, like, what, you know, what would the
Well,
actual people who would do violence, not
right.
just talk on shows and whatever, right? I mean, people are going to take action to what you're telling them.
That's an awesome question, and there's a number of angles on the answer. For one, uh, neo Nazis, white nationalists, like all forms of violent extremism, are accelerationists. So, like even back in my day, late '80s, early 1990s, our mission was to kick off a race war. We wanted to incite a race war, which would bring down our entire society into a burning rubble, and then of course we would come out on top. Like that was the plan. So there's a lot of people in the far right white nationalist space who, no matter where the anti-Semitism is coming from, they love it just from an accelerationist standpoint. Because as history has shown us, when anti-Semitism takes hold in a society, it destroys it. There's been no healthy society where anti-Semitism was a thing. So, just from an accelerationist standpoint, they love anti-Semitism from that view. From the just vibing out on Jew hatred standpoint, this has been going on for a long time as well. Mubin mentioned the so-called self-proclaimed Grand Mufti of Palestine, who was all kicking it with Hitler back in, I believe it was in 39 that they first met. So this was like your first instance of brown Muslims and white Nazis like coming together because they both hate Jews. And this continued forward in many different instances since then. In the 60s, there was a resurgence of the American Nazi Party led by a guy named George Lincoln Rockwell, who was their fairly charismatic leader, and he had a real biting wit. He had a real satire about him that was really attractive. And George Lincoln Rockwell was homies with Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, the black nationalist group in the United States. And so, even though the Nation of Islam said, hey, we're superior to white people are inferior dogs, they're devils, white people are horrible, the whole black nationalist Nation of Islam, like Canaan, is about how these evil white devil came and did all these horrible things to the noble black race, and it was all about fighting back. But more above and beyond the white people they hated Jews. And the same with the American Nazi Party. They look down on Afro Americans and talk about what savages they are and how superior the noble, good white Aryan, Nordic Aryan white man was. But above and beyond looking down at Afro Americans and anyone else didn't look like them, they hated Jews. So Elijah Muhammad would invite George Lincoln Rockwell to come and speak at Nation of Islam rallies where they literally had thousands of Afro-Americans in the audience and nothing but listening to George Lincoln Rockwell talk about how evil Jews were and giving rousing rounds of applause to it, and then vice versa. Rockwell had Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X come and speak to the American Nazi Party group, which was a much tinier group, but in any case, you had this like pure white audience who hated black people, but they're going to cheer on Elijah Muhammad and Farrakhan and anybody else from the Nation of Islam because they just vibe out on their Jew hatred. In my day, one of my guys, all of us lived in crap neighborhoods because we were all broke and we minimum wage jobs and we couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And so I had a buddy who lived in a part of the inner city of Milwaukee, and on the way to his house, there was a certain intersection where there was always a Nation of Islam guy with the bow tie handing out the final call, little newspaper they had. And I would pull up to that intersection, and I got a shaved head and swastikas on me. It's pretty plain who I am and what I'm about, just as his bow tie says who he is. Like my shaved head and my steel-toed boots and my tattoo said who I was. And I would give him $1 for a copy of the paper, and we would knowingly smile at each other as I went on. And this happens over and over and over again. Last year in the 2024 presidential election, David Duke, like the granddaddy of all white nationalists in the United States, the former Klansman, longtime white nationalist, didn't endorse Donald Trump for president because Donald Trump's known to put a kippah on sometimes and wave an Israeli flag, and you just can't have that. So David Duke, even though he has absolutely zero ideologically overlap with Jill Stein and the Green Party, endorsed Jill Stein for president because she, like him, hates Israel and accuses it of genocide. So all the same thing happens with Candace Owens. The same thing happens with Kanye or Ye or whatever day he is now. Who knows what his name is at the moment? But when people, it definitely energizes them, and they think like when Kanye really went off the rails and started going on all his anti-Semitic rants, the white nationalist groups. This is actually like it was kind of a brilliant bit of graphic design. They somehow took a swastika and said and spelled "yay" with it, and they made that their symbol. They're like, "Yeah, yay, yay!" They're cheering on this an Afro American rapper who once said that George Bush doesn't care about black people to, huge applause or derision, whatever you have it. So it's that just again proves that of all the bad actors in the world and of all the seeming disparation between them, where one might be say capitalism's great and the other one says socialism's great, they have all these things. One of them is about drag queen story hours for kindergartners, and the other one says that all the transgender theory people are trying to queer all the kids. They'll set all that aside, all this dramatic ideological distance between them all of a sudden comes together when they're able to vibe out over their hatred of Jews. So that's what happens when Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson go on their rants, and I'm happy to say I know, and I've also learned from a lot of really amazing Christian people, some of them on the more conservative side of the political spectrum, who were just incredible advocates for Israel and very knowledgeable in anti-Semitism. And I've actually done projects with them to deploy ways to combat anti-Semitism in our society as a whole.
What I find interesting is, like you were saying, that from your aisle of where you came out of, right? That those folks would go with the complete opposite and even the enemy of their antithesis of what they're all about in order to hate on the Jew. It's the same with the Muslims. They'll go to the guys that are in prison, the black community, and they'll preach black power. If you convert to Islam, you become the man, right? They feed on the guy's ego, from growing up with racism and the white community hating on him or whatever, or Hispanics. I mean, again, not just people just think it's just whites against blacks or whatever. It's like it's Hispanics that don't like blacks and blacks that don't like white people, and everybody with their prejudices that they have, right? But the irony is what these I've spoken to some folks in the black community. I said, you realize that you're being targeted by these groups. They're taking the vulnerable, yeah, the vulnerable within your community, right, who are in prison because of they were morons and because they have problems. And you all know that anybody who's in prison, it's usually because you it's not because of the what to say the racial issues. It's more because of how you grew up, the violence that you experienced. All these things made you into a criminal is the bottom line. But they have to have something that they can kind of gravitate towards to kind of blame all that hatred and kind of focus it onto, right? And I'm like, you realize that where I come from the Middle East, where the real Islam is, and if you as a black person comes over here, you're gonna become a slave. What? Yeah, you're going to become a slave because that's how they look at. Do you understand that Arabs are very racist, like extremely racist, especially towards black people? And it's like, it's so sad for me to witness and watch how society is kind of tearing itself apart by all of these different groups. And they're ignorantly, like you guys are all saying, within the white nationalist group or the Islamist group, it is self destructive. And once you're done with the Jews, and that's the question, is once you're done with the Jews, who's next? Who's going to be next? It's going to be the Christians. And after the Christians are out of the picture, then who are you going to go after? You're going to go after each other, guys. Is it really worth it to follow that path of hate and destruction?
Uh, you're telling me I thought only white people were racist. I didn't know other people could be racist. And I pick up on this only because look at the larger framing that's been happening in society where, for example, slavery. There's another example, right?
Hmm.
But I thought whites were the only ones that had slaves. Wait a second, you're going to tell me that even African tribes enslaved other African tribes? You're telling
Mm-hmm.
me like indigenous tribes enslaved other indigenous tribes? You're telling me it's not just white people? How radical. People are not ready for this sort of stuff, right? To
Yeah.
acknowledge, like, if we just see ourselves at just our basic humanity, right? And it's ironic that I'm kind of using that to come back to the basic humanity point,
Hmm.
is that this is how, unfortunately, this is how human civilization is. I was thinking the other day, I don't think there's ever been a time when there hasn't been some kind of state of war on Earth for as long as that we've been on Earth. Like, you name it, there's something is going on at some point, and yet we have this idea that can't we all just get along? I mean, we could try, but a lot of times we just can't get along, right? Like, there are
Hmm.
always going to be these back and forths, these conflicts, these things that occur. And I think what is important for, especially like in the Muslim world and what's happening in that region, right? Like, I think Saudi Arabia, at least this is what the coverage was saying. Saudi Arabia was ready to normalize relations with Israel. Iran wasn't going to have any of that. Told its proxies in Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to go on and do their attack, which they did, and it threw everything off and derailed everything. This and that. Then we came to strikes on Iran, and really, I mean, Doron, I wish you guys would have finished the job there, but whatever. I'm sure you were being told don't do that.
Hmm.
But look, I mean, look at what Iran's been doing in Yemen, right, with the Houthis. I mean, they're drug smuggling from Latin America. Now you have like Mexican cartels, in or at least pushing stuff to West Africa, from which they then move drugs to. So you have these countries that are like, how is this Islamic? Like you call, the Iranian regime in particular Islamic revolution, and these guys are like very involved in the global drug trade, right? Even in the Middle East, in Jordan and Syria, this Captagon, the amphetamine that was there, it's all from Iran. I mean, that was involved in that. So even in
Hmm.
the region, you have like this dysfunction, right? You have this competition even between so-called Muslim countries, right? You have the Persian Shias in Iran, then you have the Arab Sunnis in the Arabian Peninsula, then you have the non-Arab Sunnis in Turkey, right? That
Hmm.
has its
Right.
own history of rule in the Middle East. So there are all these even internal conflicts and competitions between these states. And so it's unfortunate that it what they do is they tack on this religious covering to this conflict. They say, and you know, parts of it, I mean, it's deeply religious. I mean, the whole Israel argument is a religious argument, right?
Hmm.
Muslims in Jerusalem, like all of that is a religious argument, right? So at the end of the day, I think that this is why what I'm trying to do is use at least religion positively. I might be an outlier in that sense, but like I remind people that, you know, I've been doing this recently a lot, is that the Sunni Muslims, even the Shia believe in him, who we call the Mahdi alayhi salam, is who the Jews call Hamashiach, the Messiah. Why? Because even we believe that the Mahdi, the Ark of the Covenant, will be brought to him. So, for those who don't know, it's a messianic thing, it's end times prophecies where we believe the Mahdi, this guy appears first, and then the Ark of the Covenant is brought with before him. Even the Muslim commentator Imam Suyuti, for those of you taking notes, uh, talks about how the Muslims will pledge allegiance to him, the Jews will also pledge allegiance to him. So there is this Mahdi figure. Then after him, the Antichrist appears, and then after him, we believe the Christ appears, and even Jesus, peace be upon him, after he returns, pledges allegiance to the Mahdi.
Hmm.
So in the end, we're actually gonna be okay, if I can put it that way. We Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we can kick and scream all day long about and have these divisions, this and that, but God is gonna force us back together again, and things will be okay. So that's why I encourage people to see that the common things that we have in our
Hmm.
religions, right? The belief in the one God, at least, you know, treat your neighbor like yourself, and all the rest is commentary, right? Now go and
Hmm.
learn, right? Halal.
That's right.
So this is I think the better way forward. All these pointing fingers, dividing people, wave my flag, no, wave my flag. These things will not lead to the so-called peace or solution that people are looking for. These are failed approaches and failed tactics.
Hmm.
Interesting. You're talking
Yeah.
about religious as something that connects us, and my mind goes to emotions, right? To me, it's all about the end of the day. What we all have in common, what we all experience is sadness and hope and fear. Like everybody can relate to that feeling when, like, your heart is beating really, really fast, or like your voice is trembling, or the last time you felt like that pit in your stomach. Like that's this physiological reaction. Those emotions connect all of us. And my hope, again, like thinking of hope and like what brings us together, is that we will be able to see that in each other, even though we have a lot of differences between us. That at the end of the day, we're human beings with some shared experiences, no matter which religion you come from, which part of the world you're coming from. If we can just start seeing each, I mean, just this is right, like let's just do peace. But if we can just see each other as people again, with feelings, then maybe that's a way to move forward, because fear connects us, but hope connects us too. Hatikva, hope.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm vibing on that as a Buddhist, like Miri's dropping Dharma right there, because as a Buddhist, that's Jesus is he's a symbol of love and forgiveness and compassion. As a Buddhist, we're like, well, let's just talk about love, forgiveness, and compassion. Like maybe we can explore that through different stories. But to me, it's all summed up on kind of a personal mantra of mine, and that's simply that all human beings share an equal capacity to harm or to heal.
Hmm.
And once we start convincing ourselves otherwise, that's when we get in trouble. Whether it's like, well, those people are just more violent, or we're the good guys. We don't do that kind of bad stuff. We would never do anything like that. That's when things get out of whack, and that's really like the root of violence. So for me, a foundation of peace is reminding ourselves that everybody's shit stinks. and that we all have a capacity to help and heal each other, and
Mhm.
that's really what it boils down to. I'm a big fan of the departed Fred Rogers of Mister Rogers fame, the kids show. And one of his many brilliant quotes was something to the effect of, everything that human beings do is either because of love or a lack of it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything we've had to say today in this entire conversation can be framed with that truth, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And so, what would you guys say is the most effective way to combat? I mean, we've obviously, I think, covered a good amount of all the symptoms or the causes for either the anti-Semitism, the hatred towards white people, the hatred towards black people, the hatred towards you know everyone's choosing a side, a camp, almost like you're rooting for your own team, and then everybody else can go to hell, so to speak, right? What is the best way to combat these divisions that we have, and how do people who are you know gleaning their which camp they belong to through social media, how do they combat, right, not being sucked into those boxes that divide us even more so?
Well, I'm reminded of a question I had after a talk. I've been doing what I'm doing now for 15 years. I went public with my story on the MLK holiday of 2010. So I'm approaching my 16th anniversary actually of doing this work. And I've done 800 or so speaking engagements all over the world, every audience you could kind of imagine. And I was actually here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, doing a talk. And after the talk, a younger guy, probably his mid 30s or so, said, "Hey, Arno, I have a little boy who's 3 years old right now. What can I do to make sure he doesn't grow up to be an asshole like you were?" And I was like, that's actually an amazing question, and it's something I think about all the time. And my answer was, and remains, the best thing you can do for that child, and the best thing we can all do for ourselves and for each other and for society, is to cultivate our own genuine happiness and model what that looks like in the world, not only for our children, but for our romantic partners, for our family, for our associates, our friends, our coworkers, our peers. And I believe that genuine human happiness, is composed of three qualities. It's kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness. The more familiar a human being is with those three qualities, the happier they're going to be. And the happier they are, the less likely it's going to be that they are ever going to hate someone or harm someone. So if this gentleman is a 3-year-old kid and he dedicates himself to practicing kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness at every opportunity, to the point where those things are normalized to him, and that's just kind of his normal operating procedure, he's going to model for his son what that happiness looks like and how to attain it, which is effectively going to inoculate his son against becoming a white power skinhead or a terrorist in Muslim clothing or anything else. And so I think that's what we need to do as a society, is really understand the power of those three qualities: kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness, how important they are to human happiness, and how when we practice it, it not only creates our own happiness and therefore success, because if you're happy and you're engaged with whatever you're doing in life, you're going to be a lot more successful at it than you would be if you're trying to do a job and you got to swipe your doom scrolling hate fix every 2 seconds. It's good for us and it's good for society when we do that. And if we're talking about these damn things, I think that's my dog there. He's adorable. He's Basil Tortellini. He's the most interesting dog in the world. But while screens are great for your dog pictures, and on Instagram, I love a good dog video or cat video or food. I like octopus too, not eating them, but seeing them in the ocean. And so I love all that kind of stuff on social media. But if we remind ourselves, and this is something I need to do every day, every time I go on Instagram, is because I see things that outrage me And I think everybody needs to know about this because they need to be outraged as well because it's outrageous. And I feel totally valid in doing that because the art, this like the Toronto Film Festival not allowing a film to be shown because it didn't have permission from Hamas from their GoPro videos. Like, yeah, that is outrageous, and that does need to be like brought to people's attention. But at the same time, I need to like ask myself, how much outrage am I putting into the system here, and what else could I do that would to at least balance that, if not really tip the scales towards something positive, something that involves kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness. I at the same day I saw that, I saw I have a buddy, Atan the goalie, who's a comedian, and he has a great page on Instagram. And he's hilarious, and he often talks about these really difficult subjects in a comedic way, which is really helpful for me. But he's really into Jews and sports, and so he had like a clip about a high school, a kid from a yeshiva high school who's just like crushing it. He's like the next LeBron James, and he's this big Jewish kid. And so he had a clip of this kid just destroying the basketball court left and right while wearing his yarmulke. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is what I need to share also. Like, people need to see this too. Like, remind us of why we care. Why do we care about all this stuff in the world? Because humans are pretty awesome for all of our flaws and for all the stupid shit we do and for all of our shortcomings. The amazing things we do are every bit as cool, or every bit as powerful and much more cool and fun. And let's pay some attention to that instead of putting all of our attention on the outrage.
Yeah, I'll jump in there really quick. Just kind of using what like like techniques that we use when we're dealing with these individuals of concern. Very oftentimes they're young kids. They're very young kids. We got cases like 13 years old, 14, 15, 16, 17. Like most of the cases fit in that category. And it's and it does kind of speak to, because I mean they're a little younger, so obviously you can kind of look at those who are older, maybe 20s, like in the 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, whatever it is. And oftentimes we see that there's something wrong going in their life, right? Whether it's a family issue or a schooling issue, or not having enough friends, being bullied, be survivor of childhood traumas, whatever it is, right? These are the sorts of things that we end up seeing in their life that's brought them to this place of hate and division. So what we try to do is try to build rapport with that individual, because we've lived this really interesting life, both Arno and I, and we kind of really didn't even get into our stories, but I don't know if you were going to do that, but like Arno was a former neo-Nazi skinhead, and he got out in '94, and then I actually got into my own supremacism in '95. I did a trip to India and Pakistan, and I ended up meeting the Taliban while I was in Pakistan, and I became enamored by them, and I became an extremist. I had the big beard, black turban, long robe, and I'm from Indian background, so I didn't really have any beef with the Jews, um, until I joined up with this group of Arab Salafists, really, and they were, by proxy, I was getting the hate of Jews from them, to the point where I fantasized about blowing up a synagogue, and that was a clip that played on Channel 12 in Israel of me, and I ended up going back to that synagogue actually, and trying to make right, because I just didn't want that in my psyche anymore. And then really it was the 9/11 attacks that made me rethink, like, is this Islam? Like, is this what I have come to believe? And so I went and studied the religion properly, and that's where I went through my period of de-radicalization. And so I use a lot of this stuff in my experiences in dealing with people who have come down this road. Because at the end of the day, one of the things we want to convey to them is that, look and see, I've become very practical. I was very abstract, more pie in the sky. Now I'm all about the steak on my plate. Okay. And love steak, by the way, of course. So I'm happy to have made the steak reference. Um, but it's true though. I think practically, right? Like what is actually going to help you? What is actually going to do something? Whether you think you're doing it for the sake of the Palestinian people, well, take a look at that. I think this is what people need to do. It's like, okay, well, how do you think you're going to help them? Exactly. You're going to donate. Well, where is that money even going, right? In some cases, it's not going to them at all. Many cases, not going to them at all. And then we have to sometimes tell these guys is like, hey, like you might inadvertently be sucked up by some vacuum cleaner recruiter online who's going to play your heartstrings and get you to donate for Gaza, but you just got wrapped up in a terrorism investigation because you just donated to Hamas, right? So I think we need to convey to people that how can you actually do something to help, right? So whether it's if people in Gaza, you want to help them. Okay, well, you're gonna help them with what? Like you're gonna get pay them for what, one meal a day, or are you gonna actually commit to all their meals for the rest of the next 5 years? Like they really haven't thought it out in detail. They just think I need to do this, and for them the easiest thing is what is to get a flag, go out and join the masses, right? Join them. Now I'm with a larger group. Now I believe I'm doing something greater. And in the end, I'm just a very practical person. I mean, your protests have not done a thing. Like they don't change anything on the ground. They're not helping Palestinian people in any way whatsoever, right? So, and what I was saying is like when we deal with individuals one on one, we try to build a personal rapport with them. We show them that this is the pathway that we've gone through in our life. This is how we've come out the other end. We realized that it was pointless to take this approach, right? I know it's blasphemous for me to talk like this for many Muslim types who are just, again, intoxicated by hatred. It's really what it comes down to. Like I want to say to them, and I mean, if those, if some of them are listening or whatever, hope your friends are not watching this. Um, is Israel's not going anywhere. I mean, you can bring all your armies together. Israel's not going anywhere. Again, I just see this from my religious end time perspective of like Israel has to exist. The gathering of Bani Israel needs to happen for any of that Mahdi alayhi salam stuff to make any sense. So for me, I'm just like, great, yeah, yeah, keep it going. This is what I need to see to validate my own beliefs about what's gonna happen. So I just remind people that like, you can see that you think you're gonna destroy Israel and get rid of Israel from the river to the sea. It's gonna be free. No, it's not. Like I don't know why. How I know it's catchy. I know it's even cooler when everybody else is saying it, but it's still bullshit. It's still bullshit at the end of the day. You can plug your nose or not, but the scent of it is still in the air. It's not realistic. And I'm just trying to be realistic. And it's the same thing what Arab and Muslim countries are also saying is that look, we cannot keep this going on. Nobody wants this conflict to just in perpetuity. Nobody wants that. There's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of business to be had. I mean, good for both sides. This is what's needed. And it's unfortunate that you get even these Muslim activist types who are basically agitating from the comforts of the West back to that, you're just brats living in too much freedom. That's really what it comes down to. And I just see a lot of these guys on Muslim activists, Muslim imams and whatever, talking about how the Arab leaders, they're cowards because they're not, taking on Israel. And it's the same mentality. You know what I mean? Like you think like you're now encouraging Muslim countries to engage in this war against a nuclear powered country. Don't confirm or deny, Doran. I mean, you're stupid. Like it's very childish, and then you get somebody, we demand, that Israel basically, like you demand, like it's like you're a 2 year old in the grocery store demanding you buy him his Choco Cheerios. It's very childish, right? And why I'm not trying to like make fun of it. I'm trying to show how it's utterly like useless. Like you were wasting your life and your energy in pursuing those things, thinking that it's a viable technique or tactic or method or pathway, and in fact it's not, right? So this is what I want people to. I'm not doing it from that any kind of hostile perspective. I'm not doing it from that perspective. I want people to understand that, like, you're protesting, you're claiming this, you clearly like what happened on October 7. Hamas said that they would do October 7 over and over if they had the chance. And you think that that's a pathway to something, and yet look what it produced at the end of the day. What did it produce? So much so that the Gaza imam had to make a fatwa saying that these guys broke all the laws of jihad. They did all these things wrong. Look now, look at what you. This is what you did. You did this, right? So I think just to answer that question directly, I think when we try to how do we get people to understand this stuff is really to get them to look and to ask those questions and to say that if you really want things to change, if you really want Palestinians to live in a good society and a good state, you have to follow through with that on the ground, right? You cannot be claiming, from the land to the sea, everything's going to be free and think you're going to have a peaceful life. Like, how is that possible, right? Think about it even from your own perspective. If you were up against an adversary that doesn't want you to exist, well, you cannot negotiate with that. There's no negotiation. There's only you come to an impasse, right? And in an impasse situation, like, overwhelming defeat is really literally the only option. Like, you cannot, otherwise what are you going to sit in an impasse like for the rest of your existence? No one has got the patience for that, right? So this is what we need people to understand, that what's practical, what's realistic.
Miri, can you can you give us from your perspective how do we combat all this division, hate, destructive behavior, really, right?
To bring it home again, this is to me again, it comes back to human being and emotions, right? I heard this metaphor that I like to use where, if I got a gift that I didn't want, I'm going to return it, right? I don't have to hold that gift with me. Hate is very similar. If someone gives me hate, I don't have to hold it. I can say, this is not mine. I don't want it. If it doesn't make me feel good, like Arno and Mubin were saying, hate ruined their lives. They were able to grow from it. They were able to give it meaning and make amends and change everything because of who they are. For some people, it's more difficult than that. Being able to say, this is not good for me, right? Like scrolling on the feed and seeing all the hate, I don't feel good afterwards. I can decide for myself, I'm going to bring it back. I don't need it. This is yours. This is your hate. So I think if we can, to put it all together, like what Arno was saying before about practicing gratitude and happiness and compassion, what Mubin was saying about being able to being curious and ask questions, I think that's the way forward. Bringing all of those together and seeing people as people.
The destiny of Jews, Christians, and Muslims are intertwined. We can deny and debate and do all the wasteful things that we've been doing forever. It will not change that reality. There is a covenant with God that the Jews have as a people, the Christians have, the Muslims have. I do come from the religious perspective. I'm definitely going to promote that religious perspective, because people need to know this. Who pit When we pit ourselves against each other on the basis of religion, it bothers me, because we're in effect we're denying the will of God Himself. I mean, God says that these messiahs are going to be sent, and these things will come to pass. I mean, whether we're ready for it or not. So I would just encourage everyone to realize that we are not, inherently at odds with each other. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we belong to the same family, and maybe this is a case of sibling rivalry gone mad. But it's time to bring us back to our senses.
Well, I really hope so. I really hope that that will be the case, that people are going to wake up. They're going to get fed up with feeding their life with hatred and fueling it through social media or at work or choosing a side that makes them feel good and superior to others and all that nonsense. And hopefully, listening to this conversation, listening to your guys' perspectives, that I think are just very unique and much needed in a world that is just getting darker and darker, right? Because of just the poor choices I think many of us have been choosing, and not choosing the path of life, the path of blessing, the path of goodness, and being good to each other. Because ultimately, that's what we all want, right? I think, irregardless of your religious background, everybody can agree that you would like to be treated with respect, with honor, and goodness, right? Well, let's do that, irregardless of who the person is on the other side. And one of the I have many examples just growing up here in Israel where someone who is Muslim, that you would expect them to be counter and different from my worldview and my values. No, they were actually the one that did me right more than anyone else in that particular circumstance and situation that I found myself in that social interaction. And it was like, look at that, what a good testimony they were for their community in that moment. And I would have missed it if I chose to just look for the negativity from the other, right? And so, guys, really thank you so much for this incredible conversation, and I really hope that this will help shed some light into just the destructiveness, right, of hatred, the destructiveness of choosing these different ways to inflict
Mhm.
bad to others, and really choose, no, you know what, we need to stop the cycle of violence, we need to stop the cycle of hatred. And it's not just physical, as we all know, it's the way we speak, it's the way we act, the way we think of the other, right?
Yeah.
um, so again, thank you so much, it's been an honor.
Shalom Aleichem, Salamu Alaikum. May peace prevail. Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, guys, if you like this show, this program, please make sure to share it. Get the word out there. I'll have all the links below in the description, so you can follow these amazing people, follow the wonderful work that they're doing in the organization that they're working for, combating all of these extremist groups and helping people that are already there and getting them out from those those destructive groups that they're in and all that. And it's an amazing work. And I hope that you guys will continue to be able to be much more impactful in these coming days. And thank you guys for listening. And I hope you've enjoyed the show.
Thank you.
Shalom.